Now let's talk about taxation. Now the civil society organization Ghana has released its latest research report revealing that government is taxing the poor more than the rich. The study found that the poor are affected more by the indirect system of tax, which is not based on an individual's earning capacity, but rather on consumption. Ghana is therefore recommending the review of taxes on goods and services, specifically VAT exemptions on goods and services that are disproportionately consumed by the poor. I have in the studio with me two pretty ladies. They will help me look at the findings of this study. One of them is Mami Esi Eshen. She's a research coordinator for Ghana. Mami Esi? Okay, you are Mami Esi. Yes. Right. Mami Esi, you're welcome to the studio. I also have here Rachel Jaba. Rachel is a research coordinator. No, she's a programs officer for Ghana. Okay. Has there been some changes on Ghana?
In terms of management?
In terms of faces, because there's a lady that we used to have around.
Oh, that's Clara.
Yes, I guess.
I've been here a few times with Clara.
Okay,
before,
right.
Yeah.
It's good to have you ladies in the studio. Let's talk about taxing the poor more than the rich. First of all, well, before I even start talking to the ladies, let me just have a look at the findings of the research that they did. Now, the highlights of that research is that most respondents strongly believe that their living standards to a large extent are worsened by the amount of taxes they pay on goods and services. And they'll help us understand this a bit more. The study also reveals that there is low involvement of vulnerable and socially excluded groups in tax formulation and administration, and that incentivizes low citizen compliance in tax payment. They'll break that down for us a little bit as well. And it shows that there is goods and services that are disproportionately consumed by lower income households, may be exempt from tax to alleviate the tax burden on the poor. The exemptions, however, must be carefully targeted. So away from all of those big English, let's see if we can break it down to the understanding of my, no, not my grandmother. My grandmother may never understand. My mother, maybe my mother. So break it down for us. First of all, tell us about the necessity for the research in the first place. Why did you do it?
Okay. First, I just want to talk about because our viewers may not know about Ghana. Ghana is a policy research advocacy institution that mainly focuses on pro-poor government policies. So in the past, we've looked at NHIS, DACF, and when you look at how does it affect the poor, the marginalized in society, how are they also benefiting? Whether the policies in place are actually benefiting them or there are issues with it that government needs to look at. And so what we do is we do the research and advocate for some of the recommendations to be taken up by government. For this has become necessary because we realize that for the past 20 years, poverty has been reducing. And for 2014, you realize that it has reduced by half. That's from 52.4% to about 24.2%. But when you look at inequality, which is increasing, and the Gini coefficients usually, when it's zero, it means there's equality.
Okay.
But then you realize
so
that it's increasing.
Yes. It's something that's very technical.
Technical.
Right.
So it looks.
So basically, there's this. Even when the economy seems to be doing well, the poor are getting poorer.
Yes.
Is that the basic point you want to make? Okay.
Yes, so that's what I'm trying to say. So you realize that the richest have increased consumption by about 20%, while the poor is about 17%. Okay. Sorry, 30 and 17. So the gap keeps increasing. Yes, and even with the poverty rate, you realize that in some areas in the southern part, there's been an increase, but then when you go to the northern part, the rates of reduction has not been as high as in the southern part. So the inequality keeps increasing. And for this research, I think it's timely, particularly important because you realize that government is keen on formalizing the informal sector and also looking at the digital address systems and how he's going to do that. I think it's timely with the findings to be able to help government work mainly on these issues to be able to address some of this.
Usually there's a lot of this reports like these, and whether or not government uses it is another thing. And I'll come to you at the end of our discussion for you to tell us what you've done with this report and where it is going, because otherwise if it doesn't help government or government doesn't use it, then you basically have not achieved the reason why you did it. But let me just go into this, one of the findings. It says here that while respondents, which mostly socially excluded and marginalized groups of this study, recognized the need for citizens, regardless of their economic status, to contribute to basically to pay tax. Most of them believe that their living standards to a large extent are worsened by the amount of taxes they pay on goods and services. How do they determine that they're paying more? How do they know that? I mean, they're in the informal sector, right? Mm-hmm. Those of us who are in the formal sector are paying. So we get to see, when we get our pay slip, we see how much we have given to government, which sometimes can make you cry. But those in the informal sector, how do they determine, during the research, how were they able to determine that they are actually paying more than those in the formal sector? Which of you wants to speak to? You want to go ahead with that?
Okay, basically, let me just clarify that our Ghana's tax system is largely described as progressive, if I should say, and it's most especially with the direct form of taxation or the pay-as-you-earn form of tax. And but then with this tax structure, its impact on income redistribution could best be described as minimal, given that majority of Ghanaians are in the informal sector, okay. And so they are actually not going to be much affected by direct taxes. Now, this implies that the majority of Ghanaians, and especially the poor and marginalized groups, which we sampled, are more likely to be affected by indirect taxes. Now, so what we are saying here is that indirect taxes are basically, or are mainly on consumption goods and services, and these are also goods and services consumed by both the rich and the poor. So in effect, it's like how much the rich is paying on taxes, the same as how much these groups are also paying.
So what, the groups want to pay less than okay, so the poor want to pay less. So but how do they determine that what they're paying? Because if you go and shop at an expensive place, right? So there are times that you pay more taxes. If I'm buying, say, a bottle of water at Kempinski, or at any of these expensive hotels, you know that you pay a lot more taxes. But if I'm buying it on the street, I'm buying 20 pesos worth of pure water, how then do you determine that you're paying more taxes there? Okay,
so for our respondents, how they determine that is, you know, when you're in the direct tax system, then you are aware that if you are earning above this percentage, this amount, this is how much you're paying. But for those in the indirect sector, we have majority, about 71% of the respondents falling between the bracket of 200 and 500. And these, among this, 45% of them have about 6 dependents. Okay. And these people are not under the direct system because they are informal. They don't earn constant salaries for the month, and yet some of them are petty traders. Okay. And so they end up paying levies. And their concern is that it is not structured. So the assembly is taking a percentage of a levy. You have someone coming saying that we are taking for rubbish collectors, and for them, all of them is tax. Okay. If it can be consolidated, they pay a percentage of it. And yet these people too also spend, and so the indirect taxes affect them same way. When we realize they even buy more and they have more dependents. Okay. And so that is how they calculate the tax affecting them. And that comes back to our finding, which says that they are not involved. So there's no sense of ownership. And so once they are involved, if we can understand them from their point of view, we'll be able to know how to really structure some of these levies that because sometimes you say, oh, they are not paying tax, they are this. But then they consider it's tax because it's funds that are being drawn from them as revenues for the state.
So the more you include them, the more it makes it easier for them to comply with tax payments.
Exactly, basically. That sense of ownership.
I see. Now it makes a lot of sense to me now. But what then are the recommendations? I mean, what should government do? Now you're pushing for tax reforms, but how? What sort of goods and services should I mean, how should the structure be, like, based on your findings?
Okay. Let me touch on how she just ended and on the involvement of the citizens in the formulation of tax. So one key recommendation is greater involvement of these groups in the formulation and administration of tax in order to encourage tax compliance. And then we are also strongly recommending that their views and needs are actually sought and included in when it comes to these tax policy formulation and administration. And then also to the GRA, we are saying they should also extend their tax education to also cover especially the low and moderate income groups, because a lot of them are actually not aware of the processes and also how they can also influence tax policy formulation and administration.
Okay.
So
I would also want to add this. So our recommendation is not just that government should reduce tax, and we would also want to recommend government for the mid-year review, budget review, the new policies that has been brought out. You see that the now VAT has been reduced, and so you have Get Fund and AHIL being direct levies to the people selling.
The Send Ghana thing, that is a good thing.
We recommend, yes, it's progressive, because then the indirect tax is being reduced from the consumer now.
Okay.
And some of them, they look progressive in nature. So we are saying that, yes, government can extend it and look at other revenues of increasing its revenue envelope. And so one of them, we are saying that when you look at payments on properties.
Okay, let's start with what the recommendation that I have here, which I'm going to show my viewers right now, so they get to understand what we mean. You're saying that goods and services that are disproportionately consumed by lower income households may be exempt from VAT to alleviate the tax burden on the poor. These exemptions, however, must be carefully targeted. That's the problem. That targeting is the problem. So do you have any idea, as far as your recommendations go, as to what sort of goods and services we're talking about here?
I think for now we have, for instance, mineral water has a higher VAT.
But that's just 20 pesos.
No, but I'm saying that the mineral water has a higher VAT because it's considered as the poor not consuming. So there are some categories that has already been done. But there are certain things that the poor may probably consume more. And this is up to us as a country to look into it and say that probably some of these things are for the poor and marginalized. They consume some of these things more. And so then those should be reduced.
On the top of your head, can you think
of
of
the top of my head? When it comes to
because I'm wondering what is
the basic things.
So like water. So pure water.
Pure water. No,
it's 20 pesos.
Yes, but then
I mean, how do you even reduce that 20 pesos? I mean, no, I'm saying this because how do you reduce? Do you reduce that for the end buyer? As in, do you reduce that for someone who's walking on the street who is tired and wants to drink water, or do you reduce that for the traders who go to buy in bulk? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah. So I don't know how do we do the targeting?
Is that the VAT is, when you increase tax, then indirectly those producers, manufacturers also increase and extend the burden, the cost to the end consumer. And so once it's reduced, it means that indirectly affects that too. It's just like the cost of fuel and everything. Once it's increased, it affects the consumer. And so once it's reduced, then you're going to pay less for that.
Okay. So let's go to the next recommendation that you had. Basically, what I get from the first one is that we need to now begin to find out which are the things, or which are the consumables that people considered marginalized usually would need, and target the tax exemptions there. Now, the views of marginalized, socially excluded youth, startup, market women, artisans are sought and taken into consideration. Don't they do this? I mean, the media does this for government all the time.
Yeah, but I think some groups in particular are not aware.
Which are these groups?
So we looked at persons with disability, market women's associations, even youth in startups, and artisans and other groups. So,
by the way, this is work that Send Ghana has been doing. I remember the last time we did the budget review, there was a reading of budget. I had a similar conversation about how people are not, involved in this. I'm wondering, how far did that report go, that Send Ghana report go about involving a lot more people?
I think increasingly we've been complaining and saying that if you want someone to own something, you involve the person from the start. And this is something we've been talking about. And the challenge increasingly has been that there's no budget. It's been about cost. And so, for instance, we've had, under this project, we've worked with GRA, Ministry of Finance, to do some form of sensitization. And these are sensitizations they are already doing. But we are saying that they need to increase it and do it more, targeting more of such people, the petty traders, the people in micro businesses. These are people who are burdened too, and they need to understand, to appreciate the current system and how much they are paying.
Okay. Well, back now to my final question. Unless there's something else that we need to know about the recommendation, I'd like to find out from you, what have you done with this report?
So we've engaged Parliament on the findings and recommendations, and they actually embraced it. So the next step is to develop a policy brief to present it to the Parliamentary Select Committee on Finance, and then they'll just take it up from there.
Okay. Yourself, is there anything you want to add in terms of the recommendation, or what's next?
Yes, I would like to say that for governments looking more into, currently you have about 55% of our revenues coming from indirect taxes, and so it means that the burden is more on the marginalized. And so if governments should focus on the direct taxes, as I talked about the property valuations, which should be enforced. And I would like to say that it's not just about putting taxes on other things, but then there should be efficient financial management system, because that is key. If we are going to take all these taxes as revenues and there's no efficiency in the system, then it's just like not taking any monies.
Okay.
And so government can increase its revenue envelope by looking at other ones, because the indirect ones is burdening and is costly for the poor.
Okay, okay. This is my last but one recommendation that I want my viewers to see. They're asking that policymakers should review the current exemption regime, which largely benefits multinationals who are in tax-paying positions, but through the current arrangement, are not paying their taxes. So they should burden the multinationals. Is that the recommendation?
No, that is not burdening them, because already they're in the position to pay tax.
They're in the position to pay tax, so they should pay more.
Yeah, they should pay. They should pay in the first place. They should pay because most of them are exempt from paying taxes. And this recommendation was actually in line with how governments can actually mobilize more domestic revenues. And so it was actually this particular recommendation and the recommendations on the property taxes. So it's not about we burdening them, but then they paying taxes, because in the first place they're actually not paying. They're actually exempted from these taxes.
I see. So they should pay more. You were actually talking about the valuation, property valuation and enforcement of property law, and then I interrupted at some point. So finish up with that point for me.
Okay, I wanted to just add one more to the multinational. Okay. I think that what we're asking is a review, because these multinationals are exempted because of a reason, with a thought that they are going to increase employment rates and others. So has government done any review to see that whether we are actually benefiting from them, for them to be benefit from these exemptions? If there's a review and we are not getting the benefit, then they should be made to pay tax. And there should be clear guidelines, because some of these are not so clear. A lot of businesses are able to not pay taxes based on some of these exemptions that have been put in place. And I quite remember, I think about 4 days ago, the head of GRA mentioned that these are some of the things they are going to review, and we hope that some of the initiatives that they are taking now, they will really look at it, so that next year we don't come back with another mid-year review saying that we are not meeting our revenues. Okay,
and speaking of you engaging with Parliament, there's this, I spoke to a gentleman this afternoon and he was very concerned about mobile money operation and how government could actually be making some revenue there. So since you're engaging Parliament on these findings, you could let them know as well that people think that mobile money is an area for government to raise revenue. But thank you very much for coming, ladies. I hope that those of us who are poor won't be taxed too much, and that we'll be able to live comfortably in this country. I've been talking to Mami Esi Eshen, research coordinator for Send Ghana, and Rachel Jaba, programs officer also with Send Ghana, about taxation. They basically did a research that shows that the poor seem to be paying much more than the rich in terms of taxes. They're calling for review of our tax regime, which is a call that a lot of people have made. Whether government will listen, whether they will do anything with the report, that's another thing. Thank you very much for coming, ladies.
Thank you.